Attorney General William Barr will hold a news conference tomorrow to discuss Special Counsel Mueller's final report. That press conference will take place at 9:30, but what isn't clear is we don't know whether that press conference will come before or after the report is released. Now, what this means is we could be at a press conference and not able to ask questions because we don't know what's in the 400 pages. I spoke with Washington Post senior political reporter Aaron Blake about what we could learn tomorrow. So, Aaron, the president has already declared no collusion, total vindication. So what does the White House have to fear?
Well, the devil, as always, is in the details here. We saw basically a series of sentence fragments that Attorney General William Barr had shared with us. Everything else was his characterizations of the top conclusions in the Mueller report. But this is a report that is apparently 400 pages. That's a lot of detail that may not rise to the level of anything criminal in the estimation of Robert Mueller or William Barr, but could paint some pictures that maybe don't look terribly good for the president. I think ultimately the fact that there are no criminal accusations is really important for Trump, but there could be a lot of derogatory information that the White House certainly is going to have to wade through.
Yeah, and a lot of the information that the legislators would want to see and hear about is going to be redacted, though, correct?
It's possible. The redaction exceptions that William Barr has set out seem to be rather broad. He has said that anything that is obtained via grand jury is going to be redacted. That could be a lot of the materials in this investigation. He has said that people who are not charged with crimes are not going to be defamed with information about them being shared in this report. Rather, that could lead to plenty of redactions in this report. On the other hand, if we do see a report come out and there are just pages upon pages of material redacted, I think you're going to see something of a backlash, definitely from House Democrats, maybe even from a public that is very interested in seeing what's actually in this report. So I'm not sure that what we see on Thursday is going to be the last word in what we see from the Mueller report. Certainly there could be legal battles, there could be public pressure brought to bear, and there could be even more disclosure moving forward if people are not happy with this. But why he decided to redact information in those individual circumstances, that could give him a little bit of leeway as far as making those redactions. But Democrats have set a very high bar here. They said they want to see the entire report with no redactions, at least in Congress, not necessarily the public. And so they sound like they want to fight until that is actually the case.
Yeah, Aaron, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.